I was standing barefoot on my own ranch land, roasting a marshmallow over a quiet campfire, when red and blue lights suddenly shattered the darkness around Crystal Fork Lake. The trees lit up like a crime scene. My daughter, Lily Carter, stopped laughing mid-sentence and grabbed my arm. Our old border collie, Ranger, jumped to his feet, hackles raised, a low, warning growl rolling out of his chest like he already knew trouble had arrived. A county deputy stepped out of his cruiser. Right behind him came Marjorie Klein, the president of the Redwood Bluffs HOA, marching up with a clipboard clutched to her chest and a smile that said she thought this was already over. She pointed at me and told the deputy I was trespassing on my own lake. She claimed the HOA owned the land. She accused me of threatening community members. Then, right in front of us, she called dispatch again, just to double down on the lie. What she didn't know was that the deed, tax records, and inheritance papers proving my family's ownership since the late 1980s were sitting in my truck. And the moment the deputy radioed county records, her confidence collapsed. Because she hadn't just called the cops on a trespasser, she had called them on the actual owner and exposed a 5-year scam. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Crystal Fork Lake was never supposed to be complicated. Growing up, it was just water, trees, and quiet. My uncle Walter Carter bought the land decades ago, long before any subdivision showed up, back when the road was barely more than gravel and you waved at the same 3 trucks every day. He was the kind of man who believed privacy was a form of peace. He kept the place clean, simple, and deliberately untouched. No crowds, no noise, no drama. When he passed, the lake and surrounding ranch land came to me, and with everything else going on in my life, I hadn't had the chance to really return until that weekend. I wanted to bring my daughter Lily out there for something meaningful. Not a vacation resort, not a theme park. Just a quiet couple of days fishing, cooking over a fire, and telling her stories about her great-uncle. How he taught me patience by making me sit still for hours with a fishing pole. How he believed land should be respected, not exploited. I wanted her to feel that same calm. The first sign something was wrong hit me the moment we drove past the tree line. There was a dock where I knew there had never been one. Not a simple wooden platform either, but a wide, polished structure with railings and a metal sign bolted to the entrance. I slowed the truck, thinking maybe I was misremembering. Then I saw the pavilion. Concrete pad, roof, electrical outlets, even mounted lights. There were trail markers nailed to posts. Fire rings arranged neatly along the shore, and at the edge of the clearing, a gravel parking area with painted lines. I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't accidental. Someone hadn't just wandered onto the land. Someone had moved in. While I was still trying to process it, cars started pulling in like it was the most normal thing in the world. Minivans, pickup trucks, SUVs. Families hopped out carrying coolers, folding chairs, fishing gear. Kids ran past us toward the water, laughing, already stripping down to swim. A couple walked straight onto the dock without even glancing our way. No one asked permission. No one hesitated. No one looked confused. They looked entitled. Lily tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Dad, is this supposed to be like this?" I didn't have an answer yet, and that scared me more than anything. I told her to stay close while I tried to figure out what was going on. That's when I noticed the logos. Small at first, on a trash can, on a sign by the trailhead. Then, clear as day, on a board by the dock entrance. Redwood Bluffs Homeowners Association. Before I could even wrap my head around that, a woman approached us with a bright smile and the posture of someone used to being obeyed. She was dressed neatly, clipboard tucked under her arm, eyes scanning us like we were out of place. She asked, very casually, if I was registered. I told her I was the owner. Her smile didn't fade. It sharpened. She explained that Crystal Fork Lake was community property and that fishing hours were posted on the sign behind her. She said it the way someone says the weather, like it wasn't open for discussion. When I told her again that this was my land, she laughed softly and said, "That's a common misunderstanding." That was the moment Lily leaned in close and whispered the words that hit me harder than any accusation. "Dad, are we in trouble?" I looked around at the families, the kids, the dock, the signs, and suddenly I felt like a stranger on my own property. Everything in my gut told me this was wrong, but the confidence this woman carried made it feel surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's reality without realizing it. I didn't argue yet. I didn't raise my voice. I just listened as she explained lake rules, parking guidelines, and community expectations, all while acting like I needed her permission to exist there. Nothing added up. My uncle would never have agreed to this, not without telling me, not without paperwork, not without a conversation. And yet here was an entire HOA behaving like they'd owned the place for years. As families continued pouring in, laughing, and setting up like it was a public park, I felt a deep, uneasy realization settle in. This wasn't confusion. This was something practiced. And whatever was happening at Crystal Fork Lake, it was far bigger than a misunderstanding, and it was already pulling my daughter into it whether I liked it or not. Marjorie didn't argue with me for long. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped a few feet away, pulled out her phone, and made a call with the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who's done it before. She told the dispatcher there were trespassers on HOA property. She said there was unsafe behavior near the water. She didn't look at me while she said it, just nodded along, already convinced the system would back her up. I felt Lily's hand slide into mine. Ranger stayed close, watching her every move. When the county cruiser finally rolled in, the crowd quieted. Deputy Caleb Morris stepped out calm, professional, and clearly unimpressed by the drama. He asked simple questions first: who called, what the issue was, who owned the property. Marjorie launched into her speech. She talked fast, used official-sounding language, and waved her clipboard like it was proof all by itself. HOA property, community access, long-standing use, safety concerns. Then the deputy turned to me. I told him my name. I told him this was my land, and I told him I had the paperwork to prove it. I walked back to my truck, popped the door, and pulled out a folder I'd brought without even realizing how important it would become. Inside were the deed, the full tax history, and the probate documents transferring the property to me after my uncle's death. I handed them over without saying a word. Deputy Morris didn't rush. He looked at every page. He asked clarifying questions. Then he stepped aside and radioed county records. The wait felt endless. Lily leaned against me, whispering that she felt scared. I told her everything was going to be okay, even though my heart was pounding hard enough to make that promise feel fragile. Finally, the radio crackled. County confirmed it. The land, the lake, the surrounding ranch, all mine. Owned by my family since the late 1980s. No easements. No shared use agreements. No recorded permissions of any kind. The change in Marjorie was immediate. Her confident posture stiffened. The smile vanished. She tried to recover by shuffling through her papers, pulling out HOA meeting minutes, newsletters, printed schedules, and lake committee notes, like she could bury the truth under sheer volume. She insisted the HOA had been using the lake for years. She claimed everyone knew. She said there were agreements, even if they weren't formally recorded. Deputy Morris cut her off. He explained, calmly but firmly, that none of that overrode a county deed. HOA paperwork didn't create ownership. Long use didn't matter without legal standing, and calling law enforcement under false pretenses was not something he was willing to ignore. That's when the crowd started murmuring. People whispered to each other. A few homeowners pulled out their phones and started recording. Parents called their kids back from the water. The mood shifted from casual fun to uneasy confusion. For the first time since she'd approached me, Marjorie looked unsure. Deputy Morris warned her plainly that continued false reports could have consequences. He told her this was a civil matter at best and that she needed to stop escalating it through emergency calls. As he handed my papers back, he looked at me and said, "You're within your rights to be here." I nodded, but I could already feel it. Whatever control Marjorie had built at Crystal Fork Lake was starting to crack, and the people around her were beginning to see it. After the deputy left and the crowd slowly dispersed, the lake felt wrong in a new way. Quiet again, but heavy. Like something had been uncovered that couldn't be put back. Lily kept asking questions I didn't yet have answers for, and I couldn't stop replaying Marjorie's certainty in my head. People don't act that confident unless they believe their own story, so I started digging. That night, after Lily fell asleep in the truck bed camper, I pulled out the old lockbox my Uncle Walter used to keep paperwork in. It was scratched up, nothing fancy, but inside was his life in paper form. Deeds, old tax receipts, handwritten notes, and that's where I found it. A single sheet of yellowed paper. It was dated the summer of 2019 and written in my uncle's careful, slanted handwriting. It wasn't formal, no letterhead, no signatures beyond his name at the bottom. It simply said that Marjorie Klein and her family were welcome to fish at the lake on weekends as long as they cleaned up and respected the land. That was it. No mention of guests. No mention of the HOA. No mention of docks, structures, fees, schedules, or committees. Just a neighborly gesture from an older man who believed kindness made life easier, and somehow that scrap of paper had turned into an empire. The more I looked back, the clearer the pattern became. Marjorie didn't jump straight to ownership. She crept there. First it was helping Uncle Walter by organizing cleanups. Then it was putting up a small sign for safety. Then a shared calendar so families wouldn't overlap. Then a committee, because everyone wanted a voice. Then a monthly fee to cover maintenance. Each step small enough that no one questioned it, including my uncle. Walter had been slowing down those last few years. Still sharp, but tired. He hated confrontation. When Marjorie showed up with forms and explanations, he trusted her. When she said the neighborhood loved the lake, he believed her. When she said paperwork was just for insurance, he nodded and put it off for later, and later never came. By the time he passed, the HOA had already rewritten reality. They had newsletters calling it a community asset. They billed homeowners for lake access. They scheduled events. They posted rules. They built infrastructure. And because no one ever challenged the foundation, the lie hardened into something that looked real. I started talking to people, not confrontational conversations. Quiet ones, neighbors who remembered the early days. A couple admitted they'd always assumed the lake belonged to the HOA because that's what they were told when they bought their homes. Others said they'd never seen a deed but figured someone must have one. No one had, because there wasn't one. That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a slow takeover disguised as community spirit. Marjorie hadn't stolen the land overnight. She'd normalized the theft over years until questioning it felt strange. The most unsettling part was realizing how effective it was. Good people paid fees without asking why. Families brought their kids, believing it was theirs to use. Even Lily had started to doubt us, just for a moment, because everyone else acted like we didn't belong. That's the real power of manipulation. It doesn't shout, it blends in. By the end of that night, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Because now I understood the game Marjorie had been playing. She didn't need a deed if she could convince everyone the deed didn't matter. She didn't need ownership if she could control perception. But perception only works until someone checks the truth. And the truth was simple, written in my uncle's handwriting and backed by county records. He gave permission once, out of kindness. She took it, stretched it, and built a machine around it. The moment she treated that favor like ownership, she crossed a line. And from that point on, everything she built was standing on sand. After the deputy left and the crowd slowly dispersed, the lake felt wrong in a new way. Quiet again, but heavy, like something had been uncovered that couldn't be put back. Lily kept asking questions I didn't yet have answers for, and I couldn't stop replaying Marjorie's certainty in my head. People don't act that confident unless they believe their own story. So I started digging. That night, after Lily fell asleep in the truck bed camper, I pulled out the old lockbox my Uncle Walter used to keep paperwork in. It was scratched up, nothing fancy, but inside was his life in paper form. Deeds, old tax receipts, handwritten notes. And that's where I found it. A single sheet of yellowed paper. It was dated the summer of 2019 and written in my uncle's careful, slanted handwriting. It wasn't formal. No letterhead, no signatures beyond his name at the bottom. It simply said that Marjorie Klein and her family were welcome to fish at the lake on weekends, as long as they cleaned up and respected the land. That was it. No mention of guests, no mention of the HOA, no mention of docks, structures, fees, schedules, or committees. Just a neighborly gesture from an older man who believed kindness made life easier. And somehow, that scrap of paper had turned into an empire. The more I looked back, the clearer the pattern became. Marjorie didn't jump straight to ownership, she crept there. First it was helping Uncle Walter by organizing cleanups, then it was putting up a small sign for safety, then a shared calendar so families wouldn't overlap, then a committee because everyone wanted a voice, then a monthly fee to cover maintenance, each step small enough that no one questioned it, including my uncle. Walter had been slowing down those last few years, still sharp but tired. He hated confrontation. When Marjorie showed up with forms and explanations, he trusted her. When she said the neighborhood loved the lake, he believed her. When she said paperwork was just for insurance, he nodded and put it off for later. And later never came. By the time he passed, the HOA had already rewritten reality. They had newsletters calling it a community asset. They billed homeowners for lake access. They scheduled events. They posted rules. They built infrastructure. And because no one ever challenged the foundation, the lie hardened into something that looked real. I started talking to people. Not confrontational conversations, quiet ones. Neighbors who remembered the early days. A couple admitted they'd always assumed the lake belonged to the HOA because that's what they were told when they bought their homes. Others said they'd never seen a deed, but figured someone must have one. No one had. Because there wasn't one. That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a slow takeover disguised as community spirit. Marjorie hadn't stolen the land overnight. She'd normalized the theft over years until questioning it felt strange. The most unsettling part was realizing how effective it was. Good people paid fees without asking why. Families brought their kids, believing it was theirs to use. Even Lily had started to doubt us, just for a moment, because everyone else acted like we didn't belong. That's the real power of manipulation. It doesn't shout. It blends in. By the end of that night, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused, because now I understood the game Marjorie had been playing. She didn't need a deed if she could convince everyone the deed didn't matter. She didn't need ownership if she could control perception. But perception only works until someone checks the truth. And the truth was simple, written in my uncle's handwriting and backed by county records. He gave permission once out of kindness. She took it, stretched it, and built a machine around it. The moment she treated that favor like ownership, she crossed a line. And from that point on, everything she built was standing on sand. Once I understood how far things had gone, I made a conscious decision to slow everything down and handle it the right way. I didn't want chaos. I didn't want to punish families who honestly believed what they'd been told. And I especially didn't want Lily thinking this was about power instead of principle. So instead of showing up angry or throwing up fences overnight, I sat at the kitchen table with a laptop, a legal pad, and a stack of county records, and I wrote a certified letter. Lily sat across from me, legs tucked under her, reading over my shoulder. Every time my wording sounded too harsh, she pointed it out. "That sounds mean," she said more than once. So I rewrote it. I made it calm, respectful, clear. The letter explained that Crystal Fork Lake and the surrounding land were privately owned, that there were no easements or shared use agreements, and that the current use needed to stop. I asked for the removal of all unapproved structures. I also left the door open to negotiation, spelling out that if the HOA wanted limited access, it would need to be done through a legitimate agreement with clear boundaries, insurance, and written consent. I mailed it certified so there would be no confusion about whether it was received. Marjorie's response came faster than I expected. Within days, flyers appeared in mailboxes announcing an emergency HOA meeting. The language was dramatic. Phrases like "protecting community resources" and "defending our children's access" were printed in bold. Then came the assessment notice. Every homeowner was being charged a large legal fee to fund what Marjorie called a necessary defense against outside threats. That outside threat was me. I started hearing things through neighbors who were still willing to talk. Marjorie was telling people I wanted to fence off the lake immediately, that I planned to press charges against parents, that I was trying to sell the land to developers. None of it was true, but fear spreads faster than facts. Lily overheard one conversation at the grocery store where someone referred to me as the guy trying to take the lake from kids. She asked me that night if people hated us. I told her the truth, which was that some people were scared, and scared people sometimes believed the wrong things. Marjorie didn't stop at meetings and rumors. She started calling the police again. The first call claimed there were unauthorized vehicles on HOA property. The second alleged harassment. Another mentioned unsafe conditions. Each time, Deputy Morris or one of his colleagues showed up, spoke to me, checked records, and left. Each time, the outcome was the same: no violation, no crime, no emergency. After the third call, Deputy Morris pulled me aside and spoke quietly. He told me he was documenting everything. He explained that repeated false reports weren't just annoying, they were serious. He didn't say it angrily. He said it like a man watching someone dig a hole and refusing to stop. The neighborhood started splitting right down the middle. Some homeowners were furious about the assessment and demanded answers. Others doubled down on Marjorie's narrative, convinced that if they just fought hard enough, the lake would somehow become theirs. People who had waved at each other for years stopped making eye contact. Group chats exploded. Yard signs went up. The sense of community Marjorie claimed to be protecting was unraveling in real time. I tried reaching out directly to a few board members, hoping reason would break through. Most didn't respond. One admitted quietly that none of this felt right, but said Marjorie was handling it, and they didn't want trouble. That was the moment I realized something important. Marjorie wasn't trying to resolve this. She was trying to overwhelm it. She believed that if she created enough noise, enough paperwork, enough fear, I'd back down. That I'd decide it wasn't worth the stress, sell, or cave to whatever terms she dictated. She was treating intimidation like a strategy. The worst part was watching Lily absorb it all. She became quieter, more observant. She asked careful questions instead of excited ones. One night she asked me why someone would lie so much if they were right. I didn't have a perfect answer, but I told her that some people confuse being loud with being correct. By then, I knew trying to stay purely reasonable wasn't going to stop this. I had given Marjorie an off-ramp. She'd ignored it. Instead of negotiation, she chose escalation. Instead of clarity, she chose fear. Instead of fixing the problem, she chose war. And the more she pushed, the more obvious it became that she wasn't protecting a misunderstanding. She was protecting something she didn't want anyone looking at too closely. Ranger had been restless for days. At first, I chalked it up to all the noise and strangers. He was an old dog, protective by nature, and the sudden invasion of people probably set him on edge. But the longer we stayed near Crystal Fork Lake, the more focused his behavior became. Every time we walked the property line, he pulled in the same direction, toward a stretch of woods on the far side of the shoreline where the trees grew thick and the ground stayed damp even during dry weeks. One morning, before the crowds arrived, Ranger refused to move unless I followed him. He led me off the trail, past brush that looked deliberately trimmed, not naturally broken. The air felt wrong back there, humid, humming faintly. Then I heard it. A low mechanical whine, steady and unnatural, barely noticeable unless you were listening for it. Hidden behind a screen of bushes was a small shed painted to blend in with the surroundings. No markings, no permits posted. When I opened the door, my stomach dropped. Inside were pumps, thick pipes, pressure gauges, meters bolted to the wall. Everything was professionally installed and actively running. One pipe ran straight from the lake. Others disappeared underground in the direction of the subdivision. I stood there in silence, staring at it, while the weight of the realization settled in. The HOA wasn't just using the lake. They were draining it. Suddenly, everything made sense. The impossibly green lawns during drought warnings. The full pools when the county had issued conservation notices. The absence of water bills posted at HOA meetings. They weren't budgeting for irrigation because they weren't paying for it. They were stealing it. I took photos, videos, close-ups of serial numbers and meter readings. Ranger sat beside me like he knew this was important. When I got back to the truck, my hands were shaking. This crossed a line I hadn't even known existed. Up until that moment, this had been a property dispute. Ugly, stressful, but civil. What I was looking at now was resource theft, fraud, and potentially criminal environmental violations. And every homeowner tied into that system was unknowingly exposed. I contacted the county. Not law enforcement this time, but utilities and code enforcement. I reported an unpermitted water diversion. Inspectors arrived within days. They didn't need much time. They traced the pipes, confirmed the lack of permits, documented the unauthorized extraction. One of them told me quietly that this kind of setup didn't happen by accident. It required planning, funding, and approval. Word spread fast. The HOA board started scrambling. Emails went unanswered. Meetings were suddenly postponed. Contractors who had once been happy to work the property stopped returning calls. Then the insurance notices started going out. Once insurers learned the HOA had been operating infrastructure on land it didn't own, tied to stolen water, coverage evaporated. Policies were canceled. Liability shifted instantly to individual board members. That's when panic set in. I could see it on their faces when I ran into them around town. The confidence was gone. Replaced with tight smiles and nervous glances, the lake was shut down temporarily. Signs went up overnight. Locks appeared where there hadn't been any before. Lily asked why no one was swimming anymore. I told her the truth in a way she could understand, that when people take things that aren't theirs, eventually someone notices. What struck me most was how fast the narrative changed. The lake wasn't community property anymore. It was suddenly a complicated situation, a misunderstanding. Marjorie stopped giving speeches and started sending emails full of vague language and legal buzzwords, but it was too late for that. Once inspectors documented what Ranger had found, the story no longer belonged to the HOA. It belonged to records, regulators, and insurers, people who didn't care about spin. And somewhere behind the scenes, I knew Marjorie understood it too. This wasn't about rules anymore. This was about consequences. By the time Ranger uncovered the pump system, the tone around Redwood Bluffs had changed completely. Meetings stopped being announced. Emails became vague. And the people who used to speak confidently on Marjorie's behalf suddenly avoided eye contact. Everyone could feel it. Something was unraveling behind closed doors. That's when Elaine Brooks reached out to me. Elaine was the HOA secretary, quiet, organized, and usually invisible at meetings. She asked if we could talk somewhere private. We met in the parking lot of a small grocery store outside town, the kind of place no one lingered long enough to overhear a conversation. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. Without much preamble, she handed me a thick folder and a small flash drive. Inside the folder were printed emails, meeting minutes, and financial summaries. The flash drive, she said, contained backups she'd started making once things didn't feel right. Elaine told me she was done pretending this was a misunderstanding. According to her, Marjorie knew exactly what she was doing. The pump system had been discussed privately, approved without proper votes, and intentionally kept off official records. Then she lowered her voice and told me the part that made my stomach tighten. Marjorie planned to destroy evidence. That night, Elaine said Marjorie had instructed the treasurer, Dennis Holt, to clean up everything connected to the lake before inspectors returned. Shred documents, remove equipment, make it look like nothing had ever existed. Elaine said she was afraid to object openly, but she wasn't willing to be part of it. I thanked her and drove straight back to the ranch. I set up trail cameras I used for wildlife monitoring, aiming them at the pump shed and the path leading from the subdivision. I didn't call anyone yet. I wanted proof, not speculation. A little after 10 in the evening, the alerts started coming in. Marjorie's SUV pulled into view, headlights off. Minutes later, Dennis's truck followed. They went straight to the community center first. The cameras caught them unloading boxes, paper, wheels, a shredder. Then they moved toward the pump shed. They worked fast, frantic. Dennis kept looking over his shoulder. Marjorie barked orders, pointing, gesturing, acting like time itself was chasing her. They ripped out meters, smashed control panels, and tried to disconnect pipes. When something wouldn't budge, Marjorie lost her temper and kicked it. That's when I called Deputy Morris. I didn't embellish. I didn't raise my voice. I told him there was active destruction of evidence and property on my land, and that I had video. He arrived quickly. By the time his cruiser lights cut through the trees, neighbors were already showing up. People who'd been watching from their windows. People who'd gotten messages in group chats. Phones were out. Flashlights were on. Someone started recording live. Deputy Morris took one look at the burned paperwork, the broken equipment, the tools scattered around, and the panicked expressions on Marjorie and Dennis's faces, and the situation shifted instantly. This wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. It was a crime scene. Marjorie tried to talk, tried to explain, tried to frame it as maintenance. Dennis looked like he might be sick. The deputy separated them, photographed everything, and started asking questions neither of them wanted to answer. Neighbors whispered, some shouted. Others just stared, stunned, as the story they'd been told for years collapsed right in front of them. I stood back with Lily, holding her close, watching the lie finally collapse under its own weight. Everything Marjorie had built on confidence and intimidation was gone in a single night, replaced by flashing lights, recorded evidence, and the quiet realization spreading through the crowd. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It never had been. The fallout didn't take months. It didn't even take weeks. Once the inspectors, insurers, and county offices got involved, everything Marjorie had built started collapsing at a speed no amount of spin could slow down. The first blow came from the insurance companies. Not one, all of them. Within days of the pump system being documented and the ownership dispute formally logged, Redwood Bluffs' liability coverage was terminated. The letters were blunt. Operating infrastructure on land the HOA did not own. Unauthorized water extraction. Material misrepresentation. Coverage void. That single move sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Overnight, every board member became personally exposed. No coverage meant no events. No amenities, no protection if someone got hurt. The lake was officially shut down, barricaded, and posted with warning signs. Contractors walked away. Vendors refused service. The community asset Marjorie loved to brag about became a legal hazard no one wanted near. Then the water issue hit public view. The county released findings confirming long-term, unpermitted water diversion from Crystal Fork Lake into the subdivision. Residents finally saw what they'd been benefiting from without realizing it. Free irrigation, full pools, green lawns paid for with stolen water. Emergency water costs spiked once the system was shut off. Sprinklers went silent. Grass browned. Reality set in. That's when the revolt started. Homeowners demanded an emergency meeting, this time without Marjorie controlling the agenda. The room was packed. Voices were raised. Questions flew. People wanted to know why they were assessed legal fees to fight the actual owner, why police had been called repeatedly, and why the board had risked criminal exposure on their behalf without consent. Marjorie tried to speak. She was shouted down. A vote removed her on the spot. Dennis Holt resigned before he could be formally removed. Other board members followed, some in tears, others furious. They'd trusted the wrong person. The legal consequences followed quickly. Marjorie was charged for repeated false police reports, obstruction for attempting to destroy evidence, fraud for misrepresenting ownership, utility theft for the water diversion. It wasn't one big dramatic charge. It was many smaller ones that stacked together into something unavoidable. Civil court was even harsher. Every fee collected under the lake access program was ordered repaid. Restoration costs were assessed. Additional penalties were levied for unauthorized construction and environmental damage. The money didn't come from the HOA anymore. It came from Marjorie personally. She fought it, lost. And when the judgments came due, so did the consequences. Redwood Bluffs HOA didn't survive the scandal. It dissolved under its own weight and reformed months later as a voluntary neighborhood association with limited authority and strict transparency requirements. No amenities. No land claims. No mandatory fees. The most surprising part came later. A few families approached me quietly. They apologized. They explained they'd believed what they were told and asked if there was any way to access the lake the right way. We talked. We wrote a simple agreement. Limited hours. Clear rules. Written permission. Revocable at any time. Lily helped me draft it. Standing by the water one evening, watching Ranger nap in the grass, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Not because I'd won, but because the truth had finally settled in. No amount of confidence, paperwork noise, or shouting could change one simple fact. You can't steal land and call it community. And once the lie was exposed, there was nothing left to spin. In the weeks after everything settled, Crystal Fork Lake slowly became what it was always meant to be. Quiet. Still, honest. The docks were gone. The signs came down. The water moved the way it should, without pumps pulling from it in secret. Ranger went back to sleeping in the shade instead of pacing the tree line, like his job was finally done. Lily changed too. She stopped asking if we were in trouble. She started asking when we could go fishing again. One evening, sitting by the shore with our lines in the water, she asked me what the whole mess had taught me. I told her the truth. That confidence doesn't equal ownership. That a committee vote doesn't replace consent. And that kindness, when it's taken instead of respected, turns into something dangerous. My Uncle Walter tried to be neighborly. He offered a simple favor. Marjorie saw that favor and tried to turn it into a kingdom. Fees, rules, meetings, speeches, all of it built on a lie so thin it only survived because no one challenged it. Until she made that call, one phone call. One attempt to use authority where she had none, and everything unraveled. Not because I raised my voice, or played games, or tried to outmuscle anyone, but because the truth doesn't need volume. It just needs daylight. Lily reeled in a small fish and laughed, and in that moment I knew something important had been preserved. Not just land, but trust. Not just water, but boundaries. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Update. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?